I was here. Chapter 1, Part 2. The Uncanny Coincidence. I hope in my reincarnation back into this world through my offspring. I hope that upon my transition from this station of life, that I'm empowered by divinity to engage the lives of my children's 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 children. I hope that they'll understand the importance of Black empowerment. I hope that they'll make ascent to nationhood, separating themselves from the insane notions of this Neanderthal, and engage divinity for true liberation. If I reemerge and enter the same socioeconomics that were active when I left, my hope is to practice law and work towards the empowering of humanity. I've been led by the shooting star, moved by my gut feeling, and impressed upon by the dream. I've experienced the uncanny knowing and been blown away by the uncanny coincidence. I operated in the take for 8 years and accomplished over 125 successful jobs during my tenure. It was the first time I'd experienced success under white occupation. As Sun Tzu said, in times of war, the taking of one of your enemy's horses is equivalent to 4 or 5 of your own. I learned the relevance of this proverb firsthand. As a result, my life experience and outlook would be changed forever. Whenever it was close to go time, I'd experience the kind of nerves you get before a big competition. I'd sit in the shower, and with the water running over my crown, I'd talk quietly to myself. I'd drone, allowing the deep rumble of my groaning to break up any angst that weighed heavily upon my chest. I'd rehearse my plans, speak of my hopes and fears, while acknowledging the presence of the divine. Through these spiritual processes, I generally make peace with the possibilities. One day, I settled on doing exploit in Virginia. I had hoped with all my heart that I was hearing divinity clearly. In that time, I was convinced of the Old Testament perspective of who God is. I traversed the corporate landscape as a hunter. My prey were those ongoing criminal enterprises incorporated in the southeastern territories. After confirming my travel plans, I went shopping where I was approached by this older white woman. She requested my assistance with reaching an item upon the top shelf. I assisted her, and she began telling me the story of how she was mugged by a young Black male. She spoke with me about the anxiety she'd been experiencing when she sees Black men now. This was over 15 years ago, and I hadn't yet evolved the political perspective I hold today. Therefore, I was full of compassion and utilized my empathy to serve her. During the 8-year, I'd set monies aside for the work of the quote-unquote Lord. I told her that I ran a community outreach, and if she'd allow me to, I'd like to be a help to her. For this reason, we exchanged numbers before we departed. When I finally unfolded the piece of paper that she'd written her name and number upon, I was shocked to find her name was Virginia. I call this the uncanny coincidence. What are the chances that I'd run into a woman named Virginia in a time that I was seeking clarity as to where to go? Likewise, I've watched as a prosecutor stood in bold opposition to my defense attorney, shaking her head in strong objection to his request, only to stop mid-sentence, look up at the ceiling, and sign off on the plea agreement while saying, "I don't know why I'm doing this." I call this the uncanny coincidence. I followed a detective at his directive, to a police vehicle impound lot doing 85 miles per hour down a Georgia highway, thinking to myself, does he remember that I'm following him? That same detective later told me before we parted ways, keep your head low. His word to the wise sponsored another 5 years of success in the take. I call this the uncanny coincidence. At some point during the 8-year, I was impressed to believe that divinity would have me transition into the field of fitness. I looked into it and brought to their attention that I couldn't survive on $250 a week. Uncannily, while sitting in the office of a wise counsel, I was asked, if you walked away with $250K one day, would you make that transition? I replied to her that I know what the answer should be, but. Within a month and a half of that conversation, I was caught behind enemy lines. I was later brought to trial and sentenced to 12 months of confinement. After my release, I went from sleeping in my car to sleeping in the break room of a gym that I worked at, where I made $250 a week. The uncanny knowing and the uncanny coincidence go hand in hand in the life of the practitioner. It's important not to value the gift over the giver. Sometimes the beauty of divinities engaging can blind us of their divine nature, while their intervention in our affairs can cause us to perceive ourselves more divinely than we ought to.